All right, time to introduce our lovely speakers for the evening. Um, we thank Amy Perrell for sharing her story with us tonight. And her sister, Christy Sheets, is also joining her to be moral support and to fill in on parts of the story. So, welcome.
All right, good evening. My name is Amy Perrell, and like Julie said, this is my sister Christy Sheets, and I have attended church here at Woodridge for probably about 12 years, and have come to many Living Intentionally events myself, and never in a million years thought I would be up here giving my story. So I brought my sister Christy to help me share. I also just want to mention that my mom, Joyce, is here, and Annie McDaniels, dear friend, and actually Kelly, who just spoke. They're all a part of our story. We've been on this journey together, and just are a big part of our story. So the last couple of years have been pretty rough, to put it mildly. God did not spare us from heartache or pain, but what I am excited to share with you is how He just, in my mind, undeniably kind of orchestrated events to help us get through it. And we're sharing kind of the biggest God moments. Over the last 2 years, there's been so many small miracles too that, I wish we could cover them all. For me, I think most of the time it's easier to see how God has been with me, after going through a tough season, and you kind of look back and see how He's carried you. But I am here to say this time I have clearly seen Him work all along. So I hope you listen to our story and can say, wow, is God good? Not poor Amy and poor Christy, because without a doubt we can say that God has it. Whatever we will face in the future, we just know He will take care of us. He just keeps proving to us that He will put into place whatever it takes to meet our needs, even before we know that we need them. So first we need to give you a little history about our family. My husband Jay passed away 2 years ago from a cardiac arrest. This is young us in 1997 when I graduated from nursing school. And I had met him at the Sunshine Factory when I was 21 years old over at its original location in New Hope. And honestly, we really did have a lot of fun. Our personalities could not have been more opposite, but we balanced each other well. About 5 years into our dating relationship, we got engaged on Valentine's Day, and you'll have to check out marrymeamy.com. It's still up. So we have 3 kids today. Our oldest son, Dylan, is 17. Our daughter, Bryn, is 15. And youngest son, Colt, is 12. And all 3 of them remind me so much of Jay in their own ways. Jay himself grew up in a close family with both parents and 3 brothers. His mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. I think it's been about 14 years now. She is truly a walking miracle. She's one of the strongest women I know and an inspiration to many. And just 2 weeks ago, she was given the fantastic news from the Mayo Clinic that there continues to be no cancer to treat at this time. So we are so grateful for every day that we have with her. Jay himself was a natural leader. He had many friends. He had mastered the ability to make people laugh by his politically incorrect and off-color jokes. He kept things very loud and fun in our home, but, our life was far from perfect. He started and grew from the ground up a digital agency, and for years this company supported and still supports today a nonprofit called Widow Might. Ironically, I use them as a resource today.
And the next picture is a picture of my family. My husband, Scott, is currently serving as associate pastor at Coon Rapids Evangelical Free Church. And we have 3 children. Our oldest 2 sons, Toby and Elijah, live in Fargo on their own. They're learning how to be adults in life. It's actually Toby's birthday today, so he turns 23. Abby, our youngest, lives with us here in Maple Grove. She just turned 16, well, 16 in the fall, but got her license, and now she has successfully commandeered my car for her very own transportation needs, and I'm the one that gets dropped off at work and picked up. So one of my earliest family memories of my love for my dear sister was when a blanket in our laundry room caught on fire, and I was obviously concerned with her safety, so I grabbed her by the top of her diaper and pulled her up to the front door with my hand on the doorknob, ready to drag her out if Dad was unable to put out the fire. Well, he did, and we were all safe. So, little sisters are wonderful things to love and to cherish, as long as you remember when you put the Cheerios up their nose to put them straight on so they can still breathe through the hole. That's what I tried to explain to my mom and my very worried aunt. I mean, you can still breathe. You're just fine.
Oh, my. So this is a picture of us on an Easter Sunday. You know, growing up, it's just the two of us girls, and we always had new dresses for Easter and many years of matching outfits and hairdos and even hats and gloves. Church was always a very important part of our family's life. Our dad was the church chairman for many years, and Mom was always involved in like the choir or Bible studies. Christy and I were involved in like Sunday school and youth group, and I would say pretty much church was our social life. Our growing up years were pretty simple and easy. But anyhow, I would say that much of the last 2 years have really been because of Christy and her husband, Scott, really being in tune with the Holy Spirit and, you know, being willing to do what he's asked of them.
Scott and I had been serving in North Dakota for over 20 years, first in Bismarck and then in Mayville. This was the home our children knew for the most of their lives. We loved our church and community. But in 2019, we both started feeling a need to be closer to family. A burden began to impress on our hearts. Scott's family is in Ohio, and his mother had suffered a stroke years before, and her health was starting to decline rapidly. We could also see how the years of it were taking a toll on our parents as they tried to manage 2 properties. We couldn't really explain it, but we both felt that God wanted a part of our ministry going forward to be for our family. So, in a big step of faith, Scott turned in his resignation in January 2020, with the end of May as being his last day. Granted, this was all before COVID hit, so we really did start to question our own sanity as everything was closing down. But you know, we still felt like it was God's leading. So even though we were very unsure about the timing, we trusted that God would make it clear.
And one day the 3 of us were talking, and Scott actually said to both Christy and me, you know, I know we feel like we're coming back to Minnesota to help care for our parents, but for some reason I feel like Amy's going to need our help. So, with no jobs lined up, no place to live, no school for their daughter, he turned in his resignation. And so Christy already said it, I just have to repeat it. He resigned in January of 2020 with the end of May as his last day. On May 7th, I found my husband dead in our bed. That day I'd gotten up at 6 in the morning like usual, made my cup of coffee, and just proceeded to work in my home office. You know, I love my mornings. It's kind of the quiet before the storm when the kids get up. And at 6:45, I heard Jay's alarm go off. And now normally he would hit the snooze button like over and over and over before finally getting out of bed. But this day he just shut it off. So I just assumed he was sleeping in. But at the same time, he shut the alarm off. I heard this kind of a loud thud or bang. And the thing about Jay, I always knew wherever he was in our house because he was so loud. And I truly did not think there was anything wrong. So about 7:30-ish, I went upstairs to shower and get ready for the day, and Jay was in bed. He had pulled the sheet up over his head, which was not abnormal, but he didn't stir when I was in the room getting ready. And I thought, wow, he's really tired. I didn't notice at that point that he had knocked his lamp off of his nightstand, and it was kind of wedged between the nightstand and the wall. So the kids were doing distance learning because of COVID, and Bryn was upstairs in her bedroom, which was right next to ours, and Colt was downstairs in the sunroom. Dylan had actually spent the night at a friend's house, so he wasn't even home. And I was helping Colt with a test and had growing concern about Jay. It was almost 10:30, and he still wasn't out of bed, and not a sound was coming from the upstairs. So I went upstairs, and the minute I saw him from down the hall, I just had this horrible feeling in my stomach because I could see he hadn't changed positions since I had been in 3 hours earlier. I will spare you the details, but basically when I pulled back the sheet, I just started to scream. Seeing my husband like this caused me to violently shake in a way that I felt like I was having a seizure. I really can only describe it as pure trauma. This uncontrollable shaking slowly stopped, but my insides were just shaken to my core. It really felt like a flood of adrenaline that just kind of lasted for days, maybe weeks or longer. My mind was covered by a thick fog, and honestly, I still have a hard time remembering things. It was the most painful and raw experience I have ever felt. There really are no words. For some reason, I envisioned this huge hand of God just like reaching down into our bedroom and kind of plucking his spirit just right out of his body. There was really nothing I could do because he was gone. I was never mad at God, but I did have a hard time praying following his death. I remember thinking, if God's going to do what's already determined anyways, why bother asking for anything different? So, in the story, The Heaven is for Real, that boy named Colton Burpo, he recognizes the real Jesus that's painted by this 8-year-old Russian girl named Akian Kramirik. Well, this is the real Jesus, but I bought a copy of her painting years ago and have it in my upstairs hallway by all of our bedrooms. And for some reason, I think it was easier for me to have a few good conversations with that picture than it was to pray. The only thing I really ever heard back was, I have him. Being that this wasn't a violent type of death, I didn't experience flashbacks or nightmares, but I do still have this moment of anxiety when I look at my kids soundly sleeping in their beds. I called 911, and then Dave, Jay's youngest brother. He called his family, tracked down Dylan, brought him home. Bryn was able to get a hold of Christy's daughter, Abby, and my family was on their way. Soon, all the Perils were at our house, and we basically just sat outside in lawn chairs, just in utter shock. Friends and neighbors were stopping by. Father Steve from Holy Name came to be with us, and he said a special sending prayer over Jay's body with the family. Later that day, Pastor Paul and Joni were able to visit and pray with us. My phone was lighting up with messages. Food was appearing out of nowhere. The immediate support was unbelievable. When they arrived to take his body, we all watched the men roll the gurney out of the house and load his body into the back of the van. And that was the last time I saw my husband. The following day, the Peril family and one of Jay's best friends, Dean Stinchfield, joined me at the funeral home in Waconia. Christy and Scott had driven me there. I was in no shape to drive. I did not sleep at all that first night, and really not much that first week. But at this point, COVID restrictions only allowed for 10 people at a funeral service, which that didn't even cover our family. So we decided to hold off and see if those restrictions would lift. After our funeral discussions were done, I just sat at the table with Dave and Dean, and I could hardly form a sentence. Dave said, "I'll help with the business," and Dean responded, "Then I'll help with personal." I had amazing support to help me walk through this. The Monday following, which was the next business day, Dave showed up to the digital agency. His own business travel had stopped because of COVID, and he basically was able to bring his laptop, sit at Jay's desk, and run Jay's company, as well as his own. Ultimately, we hired a new president to run the agency, whose name is, ironically, Jay. At this point, Dave and I go in quarterly for just kind of an executive summary. Even though he has his own business to run, he generously gives his time and knowledge to help keep the agency on track. I have to say here that the entire Peril family has been so good to us. God is providing for me. About a month after his passing, the funeral restrictions lifted, and we were able to have 250 people for a service, but we had to use Sign Up Genius. Jay had always made me promise to have bagpipes playing Amazing Grace and a keg of beer at his funeral. He really wanted it to be a celebration. So we did have a bagpipe playing Amazing Grace at the entrance of Holy Name, and because of COVID, nothing was normal. The keg of beer would have to wait. Father Steve officiated. Another one of Jay's best friends, Mark McDaniels, and brothers Johnny and Greg said the readings. His brother Dave gave the eulogy. The Star Tribune had written up a beautiful article on Jay, and he was given accolades for his success as a businessman and entrepreneur. It was just so surreal.
We could quickly see that Amy was going to need our help. And at that time, because of COVID restrictions, every time we crossed the state border, a 14-day quarantine was required. Amy asked us to move in with her. We didn't have to think twice, and we agreed, as this was going to be very difficult for her and the kids, and we wanted to be there to support them. Staying with her would give us time to find jobs, a home, and a school for Abby. God's pulling us back to Minnesota started to make sense. But that was just the beginning of how we saw his faithfulness. My first prayer was finding a good school for Abby. Moving a teenager from her only home was hard. She was so torn. She was happy to be with her cousins, yet missed her friends, of course. My dad, Scott, and Abby toured at Heritage. There they found a warm and supportive environment, and it has proven to be a perfect fit for her. Jobs were, of course, my second prayer. As a nurse, I had been working at a cancer clinic back in North Dakota. COVID did a number on the job opportunities as everything went virtual or closed down. I ended up taking a position that I absolutely love in an assisted living community with a memory care unit. Meanwhile, Scott had been looking for jobs, and an opportunity opened up for him as an interim pastor at a church down in Owatonna. Now, this ended up being perfect. After church in Owatonna, we would swing over to Rochester to spend our Sunday afternoons with Mom and Dad. We were able to spend more time with them that year than we had many years previously. Dad always had a project going on. He was getting ready to put the house on the market, decided to sell the house, but he always would put us to work whenever we stopped by. The time spent with them was truly a gift, as we had been living away for so long. Once we had a good month of employment, we started looking for a home. That was my third big prayer request for the Lord. It was great living with Amy, but with everyone in the house, it was hard to get a load of laundry in. Again, we wanted to stay close to her and the kids, but we had no clue where God was going to eventually place Scott in a permanent position. The housing market itself was terrible for buyers at that time. When a new listing came up, it almost immediately had multiple offers, and these offers we were up against were like over asking price, all cash or non-contingent. There were a couple of places that we had put offers on, but nothing had been falling into place.
So as we talked about, Christy and Scott moving in with me, they wanted to stay with me until I felt, strong and kind of launched is how I put it.
But we certainly didn't want to overstay our welcome.
Yeah, not too long. So I said, if I could choose in a perfect world, I would love it if you would stay with me till Dylan gets his driver's license. That just would be so helpful. So on October 9th, Dylan's 16th birthday, he passed his driver's test on the first time, which is actually a little bit of a miracle right there. But that evening, we were all together, and Scott's phone rang, and it was their realtor letting him know their most recent offer had been accepted. And, their offer wasn't even the highest one on the table. It just, for some reason, the seller chose them, or this was the home God chose for them. It's directly 15 minutes north of my house, 5 minutes to Abby's school, 8 minutes to Christy's work. It's the perfect location, and, it was perfect timing. God was continuing to provide.
It has been such a blessing, but even though Abby's only 1.5 miles from her school and I'm 10 minutes closer to work, we still can't make it there on time. It's nice to be that close, though. It's been amazing to watch God work out all these details for us and supply our needs before we even know them. These answers to prayer, they're no coincidence. God was proving himself faithful to us.
Mm-hmm. So in the weeks and the months following Jay's passing, I spent a lot of time with my close friends and family. I have to say that every marriage is unique and everyone grieves differently. So I really can only share my experience. In fact, between the kids and myself, I would say all 4 of us processed the loss of Jay very differently. But I am happy to share some of the things that helped me along the way. First, and probably the biggest, was surrendering my plans. So we are now a 2-dog family, thanks to COVID. These are our dogs, Chester and Millie, and believe it or not, they're both mini Bernedoodles. Chester weighs 85 pounds, and Millie isn't even 20, but they bring so much happiness to my kids. In fact, after we got Millie, Colt was sure that giving a puppy to anyone who'd lost a parent would be the answer to their sadness. So to help paint a picture of how I see my relationship with God right now, it's simple. I have this picture in my mind of seeing 2 dogs, when they meet for the first time, and one is kind of like the dominant dog, and the other one just kind of rolls over and is submissive. Well, obviously God's the dominant dog, and I just need to roll over on my back, be submissive, and give him control. Jay's death absolutely blindsided me, feeling me leaving stunned, dazed, confused, and shocked. I immediately recognized how little control I have in life. Even though it does not make sense, I have to believe that God's in control. So basically, this next picture is how I see my posture when it comes to God. In many ways, I feel like I'm waving a white flag of surrender because he's the one that's in control. And I love the verse, 1 Peter 5, 6, and 7. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. It also helped me to share my grief. At first, I did not want to stay home, but only a few short days later, I didn't want to leave. It was physically and emotionally so painful. I felt like I'd actually kind of been punched in the stomach, but that feeling wouldn't go away. The hardest part was seeing people for the first time. It was emotionally draining to retell the story, cry, receive comfort, and, as hard as it was, their sharing in my grief, though, seemed to almost take a piece of it away. It's like they could process it for me, if that makes any sense. There's something to be said for community grieving. When I knew others were also hurting, it just made my grief not feel quite so heavy. So much of the grief work really was painful, and frankly, I'd rather avoid it. But when I did lean into it, there was definitely a little bit of healing each time. I needed to connect with others. Christy and Scott led a grief share group here at Woodridge, and 2 of my widow friends supported me by attending with me. It was one of those things that I really did not want to do each week, but I was so glad once I made it here. And I also intentionally connected with other widows. Some had been widows longer than me, and others more recent. These are all some of them. I scheduled coffees, lunches, glasses of wine. It was so good to see these strong women acclimating to a life of widowhood. They were doing fun things, finding joy in life, and had great advice for me. And they were learning how to live again. The song Say I Won't by Mercy Me has become a favorite song of mine. Now, the inspiration of the story behind the song comes from this guy named Gary Miracle who's lost his arms and legs from septic shock. Now, losing a spouse really does feel like you've lost a part of your own body or a part of your soul. So this song is about not just being alive, but learning how to live again, and I just can't help feel a strong connection to that. It was good for me to be out in nature. I went on lots of walks with friends. There were days I walked multiple times a day, depending on who was stopping by. I had a desire to fill the kids in my lives with new memories from between the moment of Jay's death and the present, so decided to take them to Yellowstone with Christy and Scott and their family. I just wanted to enjoy the beauty of God's creation and make memories, and it was amazing. However, my kids still complain about the long car ride. But we did make lots of good memories, though. And we also joined Dean and his wife and their family in Mexico last spring break. And it was actually a major accomplishment in my mind to travel out of the country without Jay. But we did it, and I felt like I was taking another big step. Remaining hopeful has played a key part in my healing. One day, I saw this yard sign that said, "Live like the next best thing in life is just about ready to happen." And I loved it. I chose to hold on to that thought because it gave me hope. I was certain God had good things in store for me. I just needed to wait and watch them unfold. Jeremiah 29:11 often has run through my mind, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." I highly recommend seeking professional help to get through the loss of a spouse or parent or really any close loved one, especially if a person is stuck in like a dark place of negative or depressive thinking. From my experience, the pain of grief really never does go away, but it does become less acute. It will always be a part of who I am. Personally, I think I struggle more with anxiety than with depression. Because of the suddenness of my losses, in a moment, the life that I knew, the people that I loved, including all my future plans, were just instantly gone. I focused on keeping things stable for the kids. Dave gave Dylan a summer internship at his company. Bryn spent a lot of time shopping with her friends, and Colt spent a lot of time on his dirt bike. On Sundays, we'd always go to the Peril pool and just relax. Christy and Scott were always around for lots of bonfires. I joined a summer Bible study, had regular massages and facials, which is a great way to fill the void of that physical touch. I listened to the book Imagine Heaven by John Burke multiple times. My friends established a standing Friday night happy hour, and it was so nice to have a place to go every Friday just to be with them. And we kept it going through all of the COVID shutdowns, too. Dean helped me navigate through much of the paperwork and financial planning. He's another godly influence that the kids really enjoy and respect. Him and all of the uncles often check in on us. They've attended kids' basketball and baseball games, helped with behind the wheel hours, which is huge, car shopping, cutting down trees, you name it. We are so blessed to have these good men in our lives. And I tried some new things. Colt and I took up mountain biking. I worked with a therapist. I had a life coach for a while, got my conceal and carry license with some friends just for fun, and I don't even own a gun. One time I actually pulled a trailer loaded with 3 dirt bikes. I was so proud of myself. I also had professional pictures taken of me and the kids. I just wanted to remember their ages and how they looked when he passed. I wanted to solidify our family of 4. This was going to be us from now on. I learned to accept support graciously. I absolutely felt like I was being carried by the prayers of believers, and I felt strong. The outpouring of love and support from my friends was beyond words. Flowers, cards, gifts, food, letters from school children and from women who I'd never even met, gift cards, massages, bottles of wine. I mean, the generosity was amazing. The meal train kept coming, and I have to confess, I never fully appreciated the support of a meal train until I needed it. And I would way rather be on the giving end than the receiving. But seeing the heart of our community and our friends, it was just a gift itself, and they made us feel so loved. Through our community, God showered us with love. And then finally, we remember Jay in special ways. We made it through a lot of firsts that year. Besides talking about him all of the time and sharing stories, and believe me, there's lots of stories to share, we found unique ways to remember Jay on his birthday, Father's Day, holidays. On his birthday, the neighborhood had actually purchased this tree as a memorial gift to plant in our cul-de-sac. There's a small plaque that says, "Planted in loving memory of those forever in our hearts." And I think there was at least 50 or more neighbors gathered in masks outdoors, and we had a toast to Jay and dedicated the tree. And Mark McDaniels was there, and he was able to share memories, and also Jay's mom, Irene, was there. It was really incredibly special. And this is a picture of the kids releasing sky lanterns on Father's Day at Jay's parents' house. This and visiting the cemetery have become a new Father's Day tradition for us. And on the first anniversary of Jay's passing, the kids and I released balloons at 6:45 in the morning. My dear friend had stopped by the night before and gave us the balloons to release. I hadn't even thought of that, but, again, someone meeting our needs. And it ended up being a really special moment. That evening, we threw a party at In Cahoots, which was Jay's favorite hangout. I could make good on my promise to Jay of having beer for his friends. And luckily, that very day, COVID restaurant restrictions lifted. It was truly serendipitous. And on every May 7th going forward, we will find a way to be together and remember him. In general, COVID slowed life down, limiting activities, but in many ways I didn't mind it. In a weird way, I felt some sort of comfort knowing that our life wasn't the only life upended. In fact, my parents were planning some really big changes in their own life at this time.
As I had mentioned earlier, Mom and Dad decided to sell their house in Rochester and move to their cabin in Alexandria. My dad wanted to live out his remaining retirement years there. They had designed and built a basement a few years previously, and he wanted to finish the upstairs to finalize their dream home. This was to be the culmination of designs and building projects for my mom and dad. A year after Jay's passing, they sold their house and the moving trucks arrived. Easter weekend was the last family get-together at our childhood home. Unfortunately, the upstairs of the cabin wasn't quite complete, so they had to unload all of their belongings into the finished garage. A little over a month later, we were celebrating July 4th at Amy's with lots of friends and fireworks, just the way Jay would have wanted to celebrate. And as company was starting to leave, Mom called and said something was wrong with Dad. He had a fever, his legs were shaky, and he could hardly walk. So we encouraged her to take him into the emergency room. As we watched her location tracking their progress, I heard Amy say, "I just can't handle losing him right now." They ended up admitting him into the hospital, and I was able to go up and be with him for a couple days. And then Amy took a turn for a couple other days, and then my husband Scott was there for the discharge and helped them get settled back at home. In the hospital, they did not want to start antibiotics until they had identified what was causing the infection. By the time they had confirmed he had salmonella, he seemed to be recovering on his own. We arranged for physical therapy and occupational therapy and a home health nurse to come out and check in on my parents' and Dad's recovery progress. On the morning of July 14th, we called to check in on Dad. He sounded the best he had all week. He was so excited because the construction workers were wrapping up everything and they were going to be able to move in their dream home. We actually made plans to come up that weekend and start moving in the furniture. Unfortunately, that night we received another call. This time, Dad's fever was back, and this time he was feeling short of breath. So again, Mom drove him back to the ER. Scott immediately headed up to Alex to be with Mom. Amy and I listened on the phone in the three-way call as Mom was in Dad's room with the doctors and the caregivers. Suddenly, through the phone, we heard alarms going off. He was crashing. They escorted Mom to a small room where we prayed and read scripture over the phone with her. They continued to try and revive him until Scott arrived. Once Mom was not alone, they stopped. Our dad entered his heavenly home 1 a.m., about 2 hours after his arrival to the hospital. Less than 24 hours after the construction workers told him the house, his magnum opus, was finished and that they could start moving in. Amy and we quickly loaded up the kids and made it to the hospital around 3 a.m. My oldest two sons headed down from Fargo, and we all met there to say goodbye to his body and take Mom back to the cabin. As we crawled into bed and the sun was starting to brighten the sky, I remember feeling completely numb at what had just happened and hoping and praying that when I woke up, this was all a bad dream. Two things that we kind of look back on and thank God for. First, Dad had this drive to get the Rochester house sold and the building project finished. In essence, he relieved us of a lot of extra worries and stress by completing this task before he passed. In fact, we often wonder if this drive to complete the house wasn't God-given, because after he died, we noticed in his phone he had started making a list of the songs he wanted played at his funeral. He put them in his phone 1 month before he died, on June 6th, which was about a year to the date of Jay's funeral. Secondly, we are thankful that he got to hear the words, "It is finished," regarding his project here in this life. His earthly project was complete, and God must have felt that his spiritual work in this life was also complete. Knowing my dad's faith in Jesus Christ, I know that when he entered heaven's gates, he also heard the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant."
Once Dad died, Mom's forgetfulness seemed to be getting a little worse. We had noticed mental slips in the past, but things significantly progressed. You know, it's hard to tell the difference between maybe normal signs of aging, that thick cloud of grief, or real dementia. She wanted to try staying by herself at the cabin, so a few weeks after his passing, she was up there for 4 or 5 days there alone. And a cousin named Rhoda had picked her up, and they were on their way to a funeral down in Hector, where our dad's family was from. And they were traveling back roads kind of through the country when suddenly my mom started to have a seizure in the car. As they pulled into the next small town, there was a sheriff just sitting on the side of the road. And Rhoda swears the ambulance was on the other side of the building. It's like God had placed emergency workers right where she needed them. So within minutes, she was swept off to a hospital in Wilmer by ambulance. And they did brain scans. It showed no bleed or tumor, so they started her on anti-seizure medications and let her come home with us that night. So she stayed with me for a couple of weeks, and now Mom can be a little independent at times.
Her dad called it spunkiness.
Yeah. She said there is no way she's living in her daughter's basement. But with this seizure, we knew she couldn't be alone out in the country, and we'd kind of been praying for clarity on, where was Mom going to live? Well, Christy, who had been working at Rose Arbor now in the memory care facility for about a year, she was able to secure an apartment in the independent living section, and Mom could pretty much move in right away. Later, God had Christy in her job that was just perfect to meet Mom's needs, even before we knew she would need them. And later, we had the follow-up with neurology at the Mayo Clinic, and the neurologist informed us that Mom's brain was changing, and that's what caused the seizure and was giving her progressive memory loss. She is already living in a place that is prepared to meet all of her needs down the road as they progress.
I have to say, it is wonderful having Mom where I work. I get to swing by on my coffee breaks, my lunch breaks, and I get to snack on her peanut M&Ms. Between the two of us, we get to pretty much see her daily. We have taken her to more soccer, basketball games, and concerts this year than ever before. And now we're into baseball and track season, too. I am so glad she is here to be a part of our daily lives. She has developed a great sense of humor, and thankfully we can laugh. She often uses her new diagnosis as an excuse for getting away with some things, specifically indulging in extra helpings of ice cream. But, oh well, what the heck, you might as well, right? She says quite frequently that she feels like she's back in college at a dorm, eating in the dining hall, but she absolutely loves her apartment. In fact, when you walk in the door, it almost feels like we're walking into the Rochester home. All of her furniture is there, the pictures on the wall, the home decor is all the same, in the same color. All that familiarity brings her a lot of comfort. What she is facing is scary, and we brace for what the future holds. But for right now, we just enjoy every day we have together. Mm-hmm. And again, we can see how beautifully God has provided for her.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, my daughter Bryn was having some unexplained abdominal pain. About 7 months ago, she was diagnosed with hydronephrosis, which basically is a swelling of the kidney because of an obstruction in the ureter, just not allowing it to drain. And it caused significant abdominal pain and nausea for her. This picture is a picture of her and her collection of wristbands from all of her ER visits and hospital stays. She finally had what was supposed to be a routine laparoscopic robotic surgery on November 23rd, just a couple of days before Thanksgiving. And a week after surgery, I just so happened to be working in the health office at school when she came in just buckled over in pain. I was able to quickly get her to the emergency room where they found a large blood clot had formed in her kidney as a complication from surgery. So she was transferred to Children's Hospital by ambulance and ended up back in surgery for a nephrostomy tube placement. There's a lot more to the story. I'll just try to keep it simple. But when she got all of the tubes removed, she still had pain and nausea. So just 3 weeks ago on April 19th, she had the surgery completely redone because the first surgery failed. Her next surgery will be next week on May 19th, which is when the stent, that final tube, will be removed, and we will know if this one was a success. Unfortunately, my kids have been forced to grow up pretty quickly, facing some very adult circumstances at such young ages. but their resilience is impressive. They inspire me to keep going. Romans 5:3-4 says, suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And we know without a doubt that God has this too, and we wait patiently for Bryn's health to return to normal.
So if you think of her, we would covet your prayers for her healing and recovery. But this is another example of God's goodness in bringing us back to Minnesota so we could be there to support Amy and the family. Well, her and Bryn have been at the hospital. We've been able to stay at her house with her boys, keep an eye on them, and then, of course, the dogs. Make sure that everything is running smoothly at their house.
And finally, my dear friend Annie has had to deal with the loss of her husband. Mark McDaniels and Jay had just been the best of friends, and Mark was actually the vice president of business development at our digital agency. It was possible Mark actually spent more time with my husband than I did. Bryn and his oldest daughter, Allie, are also best friends. And, Mark would take Bryn along with his 3 girls, ice skating, make them pancake breakfast. He just included her with his girls. And she kind of thought of him as a backup dad after Jay's passing. She was constantly at their house. Well, Mark passed out late June of 2020, so only a few months after Jay had passed away. But then he was acting just off afterwards, and it progressively got worse. Finally, that combined with some pretty bad headaches, Annie brought him into West Health, and they did scans and found a glioblastoma brain tumor. He immediately had surgery to remove as much of the tumor as possible. And after surgery, he started radiation, and then after that, chemotherapy. Once he was diagnosed, we weren't really able to see him or any of them in the family because of COVID. Mark had been battling cancer for about 1.5 years, and then at the end of this past January, another neighbor called me to say that there was an ambulance in front of their house. So I texted Annie and I'm not sure what's going on down there, but I'm praying. In the past, Mark had had seizures where an ambulance came and would take him to the hospital, so I kind of assumed that was the case. But at 10:30, Annie called me and said Mark was gone. He was found unresponsive in their bedroom, and life-saving measures were attempted without success. Britt and I went straight to their house as soon as we could. It was an instant replay of the day Jay died. We were there with family and friends, and Pastor Paul and Annette arrived to pray over Mark's body. We saw his body carried out of the house on a gurney. Seeing this once is enough for one lifetime, and here we were seeing it twice in less than 2 years. Again, we saw the community jump into action. The meal train was set up, food was appearing in bags. Our hearts were broken all over again. This is a tough one to process. 2 best friends who live next door to each other, leaving their wives and 3 kids each at the young ages of 53 and 51. I have to trust God because it does not make any sense. I go back to my picture of Chester on his back. I have to be submissive and let God be in control. Was he saving Mark from the worst part of his cancer diagnosis? Did he place Annie and I next to each other so that we can support each other? How can God turn this into something good? After Mark's passing, my daughter said, "We know how to help," and I feel that same way. We need to be rooted in God's word and living in communities so we can support each other when bad things happen, because each one of us will face tough seasons in life. Now, statistically, I have a lot of life yet to live, and I plan on enjoying it. I'm going to make the most of it, and I plan to thrive. My widow friends have inspired me, and I want to do the same for those who face the same heartbreak. So after all this, I can say that God is good. His amazing grace through Jesus Christ gives me hope that I will see my loved ones again. Like I said earlier, he certainly did not spare us from experiencing a difficult season, but his involvement in our lives, to me, has been just undeniable and incredibly humbling. He's given us big and small miracles all along our journey. If there is one takeaway to remember from tonight, it is that whether widowed or not, there is no greater provider than Jesus Christ himself. We truly can cast all of our anxieties on him because he really does care for us. He has proven to us that he's got it. I believe Jana's going to be coming up to close us in prayer, but as we leave, we're going to play that song, Mercy Me's Say I Won't, I mentioned earlier, and sometime tonight or some other time, just listen to the words, because I really believe they're fitting for anyone whose life has taken a turn that might not be quite what they wanted or expected. But you know what, as Christians, I really believe it's our job to let our light shine when we face those difficult circumstances. So thank you for listening.
Thank you both. Father God, thank you that our hope is in you alone, and that you have proven yourself to be faithful over and over and over. And God, I thank you for the way you have worked in Amy and Christy's life, and the testimony of your faithfulness that they have shown over and over. Thank you, God, for their bravery to come and share with us. And I pray, God, that you will, as you have promised, to just fill their life with blessing and joy. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. So be sure to thank you again for being here. Be sure you grab one of the prayer cards if you want to take one home and pray for somebody that's going through a tough time right now. And if you have time to just sit and listen quietly to the words of this song that's meant so much to Amy through this time. Thank you.